it meant anything goes. Anyone could die, anyone could fall in love, anyone could die, anyone could fall in love, anyone could die, anyone could die.
Age of Apocalypse.
Concept was so cool.
Age of Apocalypse.
Concept was so cool.
People couldn't believe it. They had to believe it. People couldn't believe it. They had to believe it.
Everything that you had come to know and love. Out the window. Everything that you had come to know and love. Out the window. Everything that you had come to know and love. Out the window.
I'm Jeremy Greer.
And I'm Gary Butterfield.
And this is Days of Future Cast. And we are coming of age, Gary. The age of apocalypse.
We are coming of age of apocalypse.
Yes.
This is the dawning of the age of apocalypse.
This is the 90s crossover event that is extraordinarily infamous amongst X-Men circles for its probably kind of bonkers art, bonkers plot. It's just a whole thing. It's a squirmy mess of comic books that I have a whole lot of affection for. And now that I've had a chance to start going back to here, I'm like, wow, 13-year-old Jeremy kind of had a whole thing, huh? Guns N' Roses and this. Okay, cool.
It's
cool.
edgy. It's real edgy.
It's super edgy.
So yeah, you gotta take some joy in the edge. At the time, this was crazy ambitious though, because the X-Men were the biggest thing that Marvel had going in the 90s, and them saying, "Hey, our entire line is going to take 4 months off to do this alternate reality story that is every X-Men comic." Was cool as hell.
Oh yeah.
And it's still like now there's a little bit more like event fatigue that sets in because Marvel has kind of rolled that into their kind of branding, but it didn't used to be that way. Like in the 90s, there are crossovers, right? Like it's like, oh, there's an event, like, oh, it's the Phalanx Covenant, it's the Executioner Song, things like that. But there are also just tons of issues that are just X-Men doing X-Men shit. And I feel like that this kind of thing, especially at this scope, and this many issues and this long, was super rare at the time. And for me, it was extremely cool. I was like, yes, like I don't read Excalibur, but I will read Nightcrawler's adventures, on this weird slave trade or whatever he goes and fights in this. Like I will go check out this tangential thing and it'll get me to read some comics I don't usually read, etc.
And it was kind of at the time, like I remember thinking like, holy shit, like it's not just a crossover. It's not like Cyclops meets Captain America. It's everything has changed. Legion has gone back in time and fucked the entire universe up. And we're going to have to deal with that. So like new takes on these characters, new relationships, all this kind of crazy, weird shit was kind of, and then also like the art style, like all of these super edgy, stylings for these characters that we've known and loved for my entire life. Like we're like, oh man, this shit is cool. Like this was 1995, man. Like this is the height of this stuff. I said 13-year-old Jeremy, but this would have been 15-year-old Jeremy who would have also still into the shit. Like he was still way into it.
Yeah, 15-year-old me, man. It's in addition to it not just being that normal kind of crossover and being this whole alternate world. It's like X-Men having alternate futures is a thing. Like it's part of the X-Men, right? It's why there was the Here Comes Tomorrow arc. It's why Days of Future Past was a major tentpole movie in the new franchise, stuff like that. This version of that is on a wider scale than they've ever done. Possibly accepting like what's happening now with like Hoxpox shit, right? Like which I know isn't an alternate future necessarily, but I don't know exactly what it is because haven't read it yet. But it's a big paradigm shift.
I have read it, and I'm not sure I know exactly what it is either. Is this real life, or is this just fantasy? I have no idea.
Marvel's gotten way more into doing those kind of things, with like battle worlds and shit like that. At the time, this was super novel. It is super edgy, as we mentioned. And it's also like we talk about reimagining of the characters. There's going to be a little bit of a shift in going from New X-Men to this, because this is not the degree to which these new characters make sense is spotty. I think like it's hit and miss. Like I think that a more commanding and more modern sensibility of comics would have taken a little bit more care in how these characters end up. Right. Like we don't really get, I never thought about Hank McCoy as somebody who could turn into Dark Beast with the right impetus, like being lured by enough science. I feel like Hank McCoy is a fundamentally good person. This story arc kind of posits like he is a fundamentally good person because of Charles Xavier. And if somebody else had gotten a hold of him, he would turn into, you know, a Nazi scientist, basically.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily buy that. Like it's a shock thing. It's cool. It's like, oh man, that's really different than what I think of Hank McCoy. So there's a lot of pleasure in that, but it is an immature kind of pleasure. And I'm not immune to that, but I think it's worth like setting expectations.
Hello, Pocket. How are you?
Yeah, he's doing his afternoon run back and forth and yell that he likes to do.
Excellent.
So,
Yeah. Hey, quarantine Pocket, same, my friend. That's what I found myself doing a lot too.
He lives his whole life in quarantine.
I think that's going to be a big issue with this entire series, is that the premise here, which is if you kill Charles Xavier 20 years ago, this entire universe changes, basically makes Charles Xavier one of the most important men in history, and like not even just to like down to like the inspiration that he gives Scott, or like him saving Jean Grey as a young girl or anything, but like, you know, everything down the line changes.
Holistically.
Yeah. And it's a little like, it's comic book ridiculous to think that it would have that much of an impact. And we've spent a lot of time deconstructing Xavier as a character, whether he's good or bad or what have you. And I feel like this is going to be really weird. And the best part about it is that like the premise means that we don't really have to talk about Charles Xavier a whole lot. Like he's going to be mentioned, but he's not going to be involved in the series until later.
Yeah. The premise is this takes place before kind of the great reevaluation of Charles Xavier, right? Like there have been hints of that prior to this. And they'll do stuff later with it. Like that's basically part of Onslaught, you know, is the idea that there's this dark part of Charles Xavier that he does cross the line sometimes, but a full bore kind of re-examining of whether Charles Xavier is good or not had not really happened. So this is like the characters are literally worshiping this guy, not only in Age of Apocalypse, but it's the impetus behind Legion Quest, which we're going to talk about today, where the characters, like there's a part where like we're going back for a man who we owe everything to. And all the X-Men nod and like very solemnly like say yes. You know, like the worship and reverence for Charles Xavier is just absolutely through the fucking roof in this shit. And you have to kind of buy that as accepted. Like I don't feel that way about Charles Xavier. I think he's a complicated character. I don't go in for the full like that dude is absolutely dog shit that like a lot of people do, but I think he's complicated. Like a good illustration of that is when we talked about the Dark Phoenix movie, right? You know, where
absolutely.
It's like he's shitty in that, but it's also he was wrong to lie about it, but he wasn't evil. You know, it wasn't like he was just shitty. Like he was just a garbage person. He just like fucked up. And like, this isn't about that. This is the weird, infallible, saintly Charles Xavier. And there's like a simplicity and condescendingness to the whole thing where like, not only would Beast turn into a Nazi scientist, but Magneto, if it wasn't, you know, if inspired by this thing, would have become the greatest hero the world has ever known, instead of somebody who has like reprogrammed nukes to try to like, you know, kill Florida. You know, all these things he has done. It's just, you take it with a big grain of salt. This is the 90s. It's big swings and big melodrama.
Oh yeah.
You know?
And the Magneto is especially the best one for me, because just the idea that Xavier dying in his arms led him on the path of righteousness, but Xavier being alive for 20 years and yelling at him makes him into a villain. It's like the epitome of just like maybe
one too many games of chess, Charles. You beat me one too many times.
So I'm gonna fuck up America. It's and yeah, you're absolutely right. Like you have to buy into Charles being this huge and angelic, like fatherly kind of figure, which at the time he very much was. Like you know, this when I was coming up as a kid, like Xavier was the top man. Like Xavier was like I had a lot of respect for that dude. It's only like looking back now that you start kind of having questions about motives and you know things that he's done and all that stuff.
Mhm.
So we're going to start with Legion Quest. We're not going to go through this issue by issue. It's a 4-issue miniseries that was split over Uncanny X-Men and just I guess you call it the adjectiveless X-Men.
Yeah, blue and gold team.
Blue and gold
with
team.
with a prelude in X Factor, because that's where Legion wakes up. But we basically just need to tell you what happened to cause the crossover.
And so Legion has essentially gone through a lot of weird superhero therapy and united all of his various personalities, and now he is way more powerful than he was before. And there's a lot of weird like Middle East combat stuff of him uniting the Middle East against him and things like that. Like there's some of that happening, which is very bizarre.
This is the most like comic I've read that takes place in and about Israel. Like, and I know that Xavier spent time there, right? Like that's where he met Legion's mom. And by met, I mean put a sperm into her egg. So I get why that's important, but it's also Legion did not go through a bunch of therapy. He's been in a coma. Like it's pretty arbitrary. Like I was reading, I don't think I'd ever read the X Factor issue that sets this up.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking like, oh, this is going to explain how Legion came together. And the answer is Mystique tried to kill him and he woke up fixed. It's real arbitrary. We should explain who Legion is though, because not everyone's going to know. I feel like.
You should, because you should have watched the amazing TV series on AMC called Legion.
I have
FX.
not either, so I know
Yeah.
I'm horrible. I just know him from the comics, and he's a bad haircut who has a multiple dissociative identity disorder, and every different identity he has a different superpower.
Yes.
So he can't control it, but they all have different superpowers. And the premise of this thing is Mystique tries to murder him to get revenge for him killing Mystique's lover. And he wakes up and he's one whole person. He has access to all of his powers, making him like a god level character. And he wants to fix things. Like now that he is with it, he's like, I can go, I have this kind of power. I can go back and fix everything. And the X-Men try to stop him and fail. But in between there, we get a lot of the X-Men going back in time and losing their memory and working on a dock. Lots of ripped Iceman.
A lot of ripped Iceman.
Dude, Iceman is strong.
Iceman big. Iceman heavy.
It's my large, heavy X-son.
All of the characters are apparently wearing like shrouds or trench coats or something. So like most of the like action shots are them like holding a burqa and screaming at somebody, which is just really weird art.
Yeah.
But it's like I kind of dig this. Like this is very nostalgic for me in a way that like I will just forgive a lot for. So, this over the top people yelling about their powers to each other and like you should do this and you should do that. And this team is actually pretty cool in that we haven't really talked about a lot of these characters. Bishop is here, Iceman is here, Jean Grey, Storm, and who am I forgetting? I'm forgetting one of them. Psylocke, yes.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I think going into the first couple of issues of Apocalypse that I'm really going to enjoy is that because of our coverage has been mostly on TV and film, we haven't really like talked about a bunch of the people that we're going to get to talk about.
Oh yeah. And the way that pacing works in these old comics is sometimes it's there's issues that we're going to talk about where not a lot happens, and that's going to be like the bulk of the episode, right? Like we're going to talk about an episode during this session, Generation X #1, which is just a fight. Yeah. Nothing happens in that issue, but we're going to talk about those characters and stuff, which is going to be really fun.
Mm-hmm.
And it is fun to check in on these kind of classic X-Men who are in pure melodrama mode. A lot of declaring powers. The number of times that somebody sets up something and then they're like, I just distracted you. Like that happens twice in the sessions we're doing today.
Yeah.
And I feel like that was like Scott Lobdell's like trick. He was like, every fight scene needs to have somebody distracting somebody and then being smug about the distraction.
It's if you ever try to write anything, which is something that I'm always called to, but I'm very bad at, like you want to try to be the moment that you consciously think like I'm going to try to be clever about this thing, and then you realize you just write the hackiest shit that you've ever written in your entire life, and like, oh
yeah,
this is like soap opera bad kind of bullshit that I just put it out there in the world, and it feels very much like that of like I am trying to be super clever, and I'm like these people have powers, use their powers in fun ways.
And there's not a lot of that. There's lots of beams. There's lots of nonsense. They eventually call in Cable for this. And the reason why is because he's a time traveler. And they think they can restart his latent time travel device using psychic powers to send his consciousness back. It's like, it's all nonsense. Like fun nonsense, but super nonsense.
The machine, though, Gary, like the weird fucking Optimus Prime device that they build to make this happen that has like Cable at the top chained down and like Jean Grey at the bottom driving the legs. And I think Xavier's in the middle as like, because I'm connected to Legion through my sperm.
The psychic time Voltron that they get to make to like go back in time just to send a ghost of Cable to go back and try to tell the X-Men that they're not dock workers.
That's the other like really super weird thing is that, you know, Legion kind of announces that he's going to go back in time, and Storm, quick thinking Storm, who is the leader of this team, is like, hey, like Psylocke, stab Bishop in the head and then hold on, and then
that'll send you back in time,
and he'll absorb chromatic
chrono energy. It's like, man, is it a lot? Like, and that's always been, you know, X-Men, but boy, it's big in these ones.
And when they do that, dude, like when they do that, they go back in time and they wake up with no memory. So they're just hanging out like in fucking like 70 in the 1970s, like not knowing where they are and
not knowing the language and working at a dock and living in a weird flop house together where they like come home from work and then put on their X-Men costumes. They're like, oh yeah, that feels good. Finally time to get into the tights after wearing a t-shirt.
Oh, so fucking weird, dude.
There's so much weirdness in this. Like, can we talk about, so like Legion goes back in time. His whole plan is like, I need to make it up to my dad. I've been a horrible failure to my dad because I've been like a villain and fucked up all this stuff. And I've had this mental problem. I need to make it up to him. The way I'm going to make it up to him is by killing Magneto. Like if Magneto was never around, he would have achieved his dreams. Fine. Fair. He goes back in time, and two things I want to talk about with Legion. One, he's like sadistic and evil. Like, I don't really understand Legion in this. Like when he grabs Magneto, instead of just killing Magneto, he forces him to live through his child dying. You know, that's his opening move.
Oh, I thought that this wasn't like, I thought that he goes back in time, and because, you know, Legion is Legion, like he doesn't have any memory of himself, and like he immediately goes into the psychiatric hospital, and he's like, so when he touches Magneto, it's like sets off one of his like psionic things, and he's accidentally doing this.
See, he gloats about it though. Like there's panels with him like smiling and stuff about it. Like, and Magneto is like later is like, how dare you judge me without knowing me? And he's like, hey, but I can't trust you. Like Legion's attitude during this whole thing is weirdly sadistic to me, both towards Magneto and towards the X-Men. Like there's a part where Storm is trying to stop him, and he's like, oh, I've heard you, Storm, but I'm just not listening. You know, all this weird, like, I don't understand his villain turn in this, like given his motivations, which are like altruistic. He also makes out with his own mom dressed up as in his dad's body. Yeah,
totally.
So like, there's just a lot going on with Legion right here.
We got to make sure the thing that you need to do when you go back in time is make sure that your mom is pregnant with you before you go back to the future. No matter what you have to do, what sacrifices you have to make sure your mom is preggo with you before going back to the real world.
Yeah. Get Gary Butterfield Sr. to jizz in a cup and take it from there. Because,
which is going to be the easy part, to be honest with you. That dude will jizz in any cup.
Second part of that, second part's rough stuff, dude. Yeah. The end of that story is not happy.
Especially in the 70s. You know, we didn't really have the technology back then that we do nowadays for that kind of stuff.
There's pre-super soakers. So...
Log off.
I find Legion real weird in this. Yeah. Like, I liked the idea of him trying to help out and fucking it up. That is a story I'm super here for. I think, like, we should probably we said we were going to talk a lot about it. We should probably talk about Scott Lobdell at some point in this, you know, and hit the art and hit the writing. I think Scott Lobdell is a really mediocre writer. I don't think he's horrible. He's not Chuck Austin. He's not Howard Mackey. But he's real mediocre. And this to me, him doing that kind of villain stuff, like these are written or plotted by him. And then the dialogue is written by Mark Waid, who is good. But I think slipping into this generic villain speech and these kind of generic villain attitudes is one of them not having a good sense of kind of nuance of this. I think this would have been a more interesting setup if Legion thought he was doing good the entire time and was like kind and just misguided, as opposed to coming back and becoming a mom fucking mustache twirling superstar.
Sure. And I like, I kind of get it to an extent. Like it sets up all of this other stuff that's going to happen. It also gives us a kind of peek at Xavier and Magneto's relationship back when they were homeboys. And I love the fact that like even in Age of Apocalypse, these boys were barely on the cusp of making out with each other. Like there's a whole a 2-page spread of like Magneto being like, maybe I'm just jealous. Oh, I mean, of him being with Moira. I mean, that's
I'm
my
definitely
wife's
talking. Dad. Yeah. It's been so long. Yeah, there's definitely like a weird tempted for like gay for the stay.
Really,
Magneto
really is, dude. Like it's remarkably like not subtext.
Yeah, for him volunteering to change bedpans at the hospital that Xavier works at. In exchange while Xavier falls in love with Gabriel Haller, the nurse. Them being bros in this is pretty fun. I made fun of that issue that's just a bar fight, but I found that issue really funny.
Oh yeah,
because it's them punching. Like it's not, they don't do superpowers or anything. It's it's like Xavier and Magneto punching yokels and being like, now it's my turn. Xavier was trained in fighting from the Mystic Orient, but me, I was trained in the street. I'm no such gentleman. And like punching somebody in the nuts, and it's like, what the fuck, dude? This is wild.
And like the dude that they're fighting is like the Blob's granddad. Like he's just a real fat guy. And I'm like, this dude could not look more American if he tried. Like he's got a happy trail that leads nowhere happy, Gary. Like why imagine wearing suspenders.
The trail of treats.
And the shirt that you're wearing under the suspenders is above like your navel. Like that's how tight this shirt is. And you just have a huge gut out from underneath it. And it's just like hairy. It's just super hairy.
It's real gross. It's like if the Hulk only got fat when he hulked out instead of getting strong. Or like there's a Kids in the Hall sketch about guts where everyone's got guts and they're like somebody loses a bunch of weight and their guts all deflated and everyone gets mad at them. And it looks like that. Like it looks like the Kids in the Hall gut sketch if you've ever seen that. It's pretty gross. And the reason why Xavier and Magneto get into a fight is because this bar full of yokels decides to beat the shit out of a legless veteran. Like it's really over the top. Like you have to really shift your gears for how silly and, dramatic this is going to get. But they're like, there's a veteran without his legs. And they're like, Magneto looks over. He's like, yes, hardly the standing ovation that hero deserves. And then all the yokels just throw a bunch of quarters on him. Or like, dance, idiot. And then Xavier's like, Xavier 1, yokels 0. And like cracks his knuckles. Like gets into
Xavier
it.
could literally just make these people go to sleep. Like he could just literally change their mind. But instead he's like, let's get into a fist fight. Or maybe, I guess you could make an argument that 1970 Xavier doesn't have that much control over his powers, blah, blah, blah. But
He'd end up like frying all their brains.
Sure. That's better.
It's 10 pages of them taking turns fighting yokels. Like it's very like Roadhouse. Like Magneto gives a bunch of cash to the bartenders like, this is for the damages. You'll see what I mean in a moment. and then like later it's like, how many bar fights have you got? Like they ask him and Charles Xavier's like, this is the first one I've gotten into. And like Magneto just knew. He's like, this rough and ready wild boy is just gonna get real into it. Put it on our tab.
The Shi'ar are also in this a little bit, Gary. They decide they start feeling like some weird shit going on in the Omnic crystal and
the Macran crystal.
They're basically like, hey, we should go and check this out. And I guess they were on hiatus, and so like I love when Sandra comes in and she's like, hey, you were my former consort and also
to
my
everyone.
Current, just announces it, and I'm like, we boned once, girl, chill.
Like it's like Stacy in Wayne's World.
Yeah.
Like her announcing to the world that yes, my former consort Charles Xavier is very funny. But what's happening is, so they're seeing this thing called like the crystallization wave, which is this wave that is going across the universe devouring planets, and it's a result of this thing that happened in the past. So like in this story, we're getting the present where the X-Men made the big psychic Voltron to send Cable back. and they in the past where they're trying to stop Legion unsuccessfully.
Yes.
And there's a cool bit, like this is shortly after an arc where Emma Frost actually like unlocked Iceman's true potential. Like Iceman had been holding himself back. He's an extremely powerful mutant, and there's a cool arc where she like helps him, set loose. And in here, he freezes every molecule of water in Legion's body, which if Iceman can do that, he's the most deadly mutant in the world. And
Easy.
It's, amazing. Yeah. He doesn't do that shit. That reminded me of Planetary, like when they talk about tracking down Elijah Snow by all the people who have their brains frozen in their heads, and I was like, oh man, that's fucking scary.
Yeah. Good.
So they're trying to stop him. They can't stop him. The takeaway, the important bit is that Legion attempts to kill Magneto while they're talking about philosophy, but Xavier jumps in the way of his psi beam and dies. So this future wave is happening and everyone is just watching it. I really like that bit in the future where like they're all just kind of talking about like not wanting to be alone and not knowing what's going to happen. Like, Gambit and Rogue are talking, Angel can't, Betsy, his girlfriend Psylocke, is in the past, so he can't be with her. So he just comes down to check in on Cyclops and Jean Grey.
He knows they're not going to get busy. Like Cyclops is way too stuck up to put one into the world.
Yeah, exactly. like just like old friends. Just like everyone's scared. I really like it. There's an amazing bit too. I know I'm jumping all around, but where Gambit, they explain what's gonna happen with the Voltron. And then Gambit says to Rogue, he goes, "Why are we doing this again, Cher?" And Rogue says, "Well, as Professor Xavier just explained," and then she explains it again.
He just has to hear it twice.
It's incredible. Like they do it for the audience, but Gambit is the surrogate who wasn't paying attention. It's real good.
Yeah, it's I think it's pretty fun. It's a pretty fun read. Like I don't think it's worth going through panel by panel like we usually do on the show, but like if you want to get pretty firmly set up for what you're getting into, like this is a quick intro. Like it doesn't take long to breeze through. It's 80 pages of comics. It's a lot of action and it's pretty short on dialogue, so you can kind of go through it real quick. And it's, like I said, it's fun. I enjoyed reading it. I think it primed me perfectly to get into our first issue of Age of Apocalypse, which is going to be X-Men Alpha 1.
Mm-hmm. And, to get the mode.
Yeah, it gets me in that 90s era, and I was like, okay, let's do this. Let's see what we got, and it perfectly did that. Also, I'm kind of a sucker for Legion. Like you said, he had a bad haircut, but like I like that dude's hair. And
you're way into the kid and play.
I'm way into kid and play. Like I'm way more kid than play. You know what I'm saying, Gary?
Are you a kid or are you a play? Take our quiz.
So like anything with Legion in general, I'm going to be here for. So
I think that if I had to guess, and you can, please tell me if this is not, I'm not trying to speak for you. I imagine a lot of that is a result of the TV show. Because in the comics, there's not a lot to Legion, in my experience, at least.
I think I had, going into the TV show, I had like weird memories of what Legion was or did. Like I think I built them up a lot in my head that wasn't necessarily in the page. On the page, excuse me. And then like going into the show and having that become like such a firm character in my mind, like it makes me retroactively like these people. It's kind of how like Thor 3 makes Thor 2 better. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I can see that. Like I need to watch Legion. I'm not resisting it for any reason. Like I'm sure I would enjoy it.
Yeah.
I just haven't gotten around to it yet.
Dude, it's like 40 hours of television. Like it's okay. Like it's a full-time week's job worth of television.
Oh, like I thought you were saying it the other way. Like it's 40 hours. Stop being such a pussy.
No, not at all, dude.
In.
Like even during quarantine time, man. Like it's like I look at that stuff and I'm like, somebody recommended me something and they were like, you just got to get through the first two episodes of this thing on Netflix. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm sure that, that's what people say. And like the way they described it was like, oh, this is a 20-30 minute show. And like the first 2 episodes are an hour and a half each. And I'm like, you recommended me, like, imagine telling people that you had to watch the first 2 Star Wars. And then like, then the third one is really good. I mean,
yeah. I could, there's other stuff I can get into. There's a comedian who talked about this and is like one of my favorite jokes where he's like, where people tell you about a TV show now, it's basically being like, have you read Time Magazine? Time Magazine's great. You just got to start at the beginning, skip the first couple of years, because it's, just casually recommending somebody spend, and man, like not to go on a tangent or anything like that, but I don't understand how anime fans do it. Because when they're doing it, it's like there's so many of them and they're all like 1 billion hours.
We when we did Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood for Monster of the Week, everybody told us, like, skip the first episode. It's not going to make sense. It's the trash. And I'm like, well, I have to watch it. It's the first episode. Like,
Yeah.
And then you watch it and you're like, the only question I had coming out of it is like, why did you make this the first episode? Like, it doesn't do anything. And apparently the answer is anime fans. Anime fans wanted to have like some connection to the previous series. So instead of just starting the series with the new characters and the new concepts, it was a bunch of proper noun garbage. And like, if I had watched that, I'd been like, oh, I'm going to get put off by this. I don't want to watch the rest of it. And the other stuff was like legit okay. Like, it was good.
Yeah.
So like, I can't imagine, and people do this with JoJo's all the time. Like, every single person that's ever been like, you're going to love JoJo's. It's like X-Men on steroids or whatever. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like, where do I start? Like, oh, the first season is garbage. Like, but you got to watch it. And I'm like, what? No.
Yeah. What's wrong with this medium? Like, why, like, what happened from the ground up to make this medium that way?
And,
and
like,
why can
weirdly,
that be reimagined?
Comics are the same way, right? Like, I would never tell anybody like, oh man, new X-Men is great, but you got 140 issues to get to the good stuff.
Well, that's why you don't tell them that though. Cause you don't actually need it. Like you don't, like, that's the thing is like, you wouldn't say that, but you also don't have to.
Yeah.
Like it's very rare that I'm like, you have to read this to get the setup and have the thing be bad, sometimes, but it's rare. And I recognize that it's probably not every, hashtag not all anime. I understand.
Yeah.
Do not at me under any circumstances about this.
You can at the AB club.
Yeah. Do not touch me. So this is good and fun. The other kind of like momentous thing is Gambit and Rogue decide to YOLO and have a kiss.
Yeah.
At the end of this. And that has consequences actually. Like, after this, we're not going to get into it. We will probably die before we decide to explore like the comics that came immediately after this. But her absorbing Gambit's memories is what ultimately leads to her. This is the payoff for the Gambit traitor plot, which was Bishop going back in time and being like, Gambit's a traitor. We remember that from the TV show. That is a long running plot that has been around for a very long time. And this is the beginning of the payoff for that, where she finds out that Gambit is the one who put together the Marauders for Mr. Sinister, who caused the mutant massacre. So that is a weird low-key consequence of this whole arc.
Interesting. Yeah, I'd forgotten about that completely. So awesome.
Yeah, it's kind of neat. Like this, it's in articulation and in the comics, it's very frustrating. Like, she basically runs away and it just is a back burner plot thing for forever. Like it's like, 10 issues of her just being like, I can't talk about it, and like running away and stuff. And eventually it comes out and he was a contractor. Like he hired them for Mr. Sinister. Like, basically anyone could have done that. It's a little bit overblown, but it does cause like a real rift.
Sure.
In the X-Men.
I can't believe you built that outhouse for Mr. Sinister on Xavier's property. Did you not get the right permits? Did you not go to City Hall? God damn it, Gambit. We talked about this.
I can't believe you called Mr. Sinister an Uber when he was too drunk to drive home. And the Uber ran over the Morlocks. So you're
fault.
Involved in the
all
mutant
your
manslaughter.
Fault. Yeah. Well, thank you everybody for listening. Next episode, we're going to kick off Age of Apocalypse proper with X-Men Alpha issue number 1. Speaking of, the schedule should be up on daysoffuturecast.com/schedule. Apparently that link doesn't work right now, but I'll have it fixed by the time these episodes start hitting, and we're just going to follow along. There's a bunch of number 1s to get through, and then a bunch of number 2s, and then after that we have my favorites, which are the number 3s, which is what me and Autumn joke is what we call jizz. Is you have your number 1, your number 2, and then the
you take a number 3.
Yeah,
you take a number 3. It's either that or puke, so it's ejaculate's more fun.
Way more fun. Stick with us. Age of Apocalypse. We'll be back in a couple of days. Thank you, everybody. Oh, wait, no, we haven't talked about the Patreon in like 2 episodes, Gary.
Oh, whoops. Give us money, patreon.com/Duckfeed.tv. Give us your stimulus.
Give us your stimulus package. Or just your normal package. Either one.
Yeah, give us your number 3s.